everybody. Welcome back to the Dr. Greg Jones Optimization Academy, where I get to interview some of my favorite innovators in medicine and health and fitness and beyond. And today we have an extremely special guest. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Carrie Jones. I'm excited because I saw her give a lecture at our national convention for naturopathic doctors. It's like, oh my gosh, she's so smart. She's so smart. Like, oh my God, it's amazing. And she has all the good stuff. And I want to take all the notes and learn more about this with her. And that lecture you gave was on mitochondria, which has near and dear place in my heart, and it should have a near and dear place in everyone's heart because we don't survive without them. So I'm going to do a quick read in of Dr. Jones, and Dr. Jones, check that out. This was by design. I was like, I want the best Dr. Jones is on this show. So that's what I'm going to do from now on. I only want Dr. Jones is on my podcast. It makes it easy. Makes it very easy. So Carrie Jones, naturopathic doctor. Also, you have a master's in public health. Amazing. And a board certified naturopathic endocrinologist, even more amazing. Is an internationally recognized speaker, consultant, and educator on the topic of women's health and hormones with over 20 years in the industry. Currently, she is the head of medical education at Rupa Health, amazing platform, and host of the Root Cause Medicine podcast. That is a great podcast. I want you all to subscribe to that. Hit pause on this, go subscribe to that, then come back, and then we talk about all these cool things. So welcome to the show, Dr. Jones.
Dr. Jones, thanks for having me. It's hard to keep up with us, isn't it?
Oh, they can't. They try.
They can't. Yep.
They try so hard. It's okay though. And this is a pleasure. And I want to thank you for taking time to come talk mitochondria with us, because when I have my patients here and we're talking about health and wellness and aging, and I make this list of the 7 things that make you feel old. And I usually put mitochondria, 2 or 3 on that. It really should be number 1 because it all filters from there. But to understand why mitochondria are important, we need to understand what mitochondria are. And that is where we start this, because this is all about the mighty, mobile, metabolic, I'm running out of M's.
Masters of mitochondria.
Masters of mitochondria. So first thing, and do you want to go by Carrie or Dr. Jones?
Carrie, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Jones. Anyway, so it's like so formal. So Carrie, first things first, what are mitochondria?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I'm super excited. And I will say that I got into mitochondria because I have a hormone background, and I was really just following up on the literature because hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, cortisol, they're all made. The first step for all of them is in the mitochondria. So while we know mitochondria make energy, we all learned that in school, there are cellular powerhouses. Turns out they do other stuff like make hormones. So if you think of like a bike wheel, the spoke I was in is the hormone spoke. And I was like, oh my gosh, mitochondria, they do this too. And that sent me down the rabbit hole of the mitochondria in general, because I was just trying to optimize people's hormones. And turns out the mitochondria are way mightier than we got taught in school, as we were saying, off camera before. So the mitochondria they're old. They're billions of years old, billions with a B. I mean, as that commercial goes, they know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. And it's suspected that the mitochondria and humans kind of merged, and they struck a deal where, as we were saying this before, that humans were like, I'll put you in a body, and I'll give you food, and I'll breathe for you, and then you pump out ATP and oxygen and help things go round and round. And so they are these little bacterium that are super old, and they've sort of merged with us, and now we're besties. We love our mitochondria because they are our cellular powerhouses. They do provide the ATP, which is the battery to our body. And in the field I'm in, they do provide the first step to hormone production. So if you got hormone problems, you might have a mitochondrial problem.
It's amazing. And it's like, I like to think of them as symbiotic. In many ways. They're symbiotes, man. I think when I was reading up on them a few months back about, these things were essentially bacteria, and they got engulfed and they started evolving and all that. And then now they're here, and they're here to stay. We should be thankful for that. And then another fascinating thing is when it comes to mitochondria, it's like we only get them from our mothers.
Yes.
Another reason why girls rule. I know, right? That's why girls rule the world. I didn't just say that to get more followers and more listeners, that girls rule the world, but it's in the mitochondrial world, it's very true.
Yeah.
We don't get any from our fathers, and this is why we try to trace, or genetics, it's important to know like what conditions the mother had that potentially are passed down via the mitochondria. Super important. So when it comes to energy, you mentioned other functions that mitochondria have. What are some of those, and hormone production, of course, hormone production, energy production. What are some of the other functions that we get from our mitochondria?
So actually, like a funny one is like it stores calcium. It helps with calcium buffering in our body. And so we learn about calcium, and in school, we learn that we have these calcium, we pumps in our body, basically for muscle contraction, the way things work. And so it's having too much or not enough calcium can make a big difference. And the mitochondria can swoop in and be like, ooh, too much, I'll suck you up, takes the calcium. Or like, ooh, you need more, got it. Let me just push you out here into the mitochondria. And so there's a huge list of what the mitochondria can do besides just make ATP. But the biggest, like if it had a resume, if it had a CV, like, that's its big one, is it does. And it's a battery. It does energy production.
And the other one I focus on a lot of our patients, because we do a lot of people that want to optimize their health and obviously get in better shape and, lose weight and burn fat, all that cool stuff. And I was like, well, if your mitochondria are dysfunctional, and we'll talk about what that means, then you're not going to burn energy the way you need to. And meaning, how are you using your fats and your proteins and your carbs? Mitochondria, they control that metabolism piece of it, right? And so and it's a big thing. You mentioned the whole, because I keep going back to the energy thing, and this is kind of like, and I get it a lot of times here in practice. It's like we do all these great things. Okay, working on your sleep, we're working on your diet. Here's some B vitamins. Here's some supplements for this. Here's some peptides for this. And oh my God, you're still tired. Okay, we need to step back, because that's totally not normal to have all these things optimized. And sometimes I'll get it because their labs are great. And you're like, oh, wow, everything is great, but you're still tired. It's like, we need to look at mitochondria. We have to, because if you're not putting out your, when we were in school, they taught us 36 to 38 units of ATP for one molecule of glucose. But I've been reading some newer articles that say 30 to 32.
It's I always just say in the 30s, because it kind of depends on who your researcher is.
And y'all got me there somewhere in the 30s. Okay, but if you are having this dysfunction and putting out 24, you're gonna feel it.
Completely. And mitochondria, they're fragile. They do a lot. They're right. We call them the powerhouses. So we think because we're calling them the powerhouses, they'd be super strong, these Wonder Woman type things. Turns out they're super fragile, and they get damaged really easily. They get influenced by chemicals really easily. They require a lot of nutrients to make them run. So if you're missing those nutrients, you're not absorbing those nutrients, you're not, eating a diet with those nutrients, then they're not going to do their job. They're prone to DNA damage, their mitochondrial DNA. So we have DNA, our human DNA, and then our mitochondria, which is called our mitochondrial mtDNA. And in the little mitochondria themselves, we have a little repair system in our body that goes around. Think of it like a mobile, car repair system. Goes around, drives around, fixes your car when it breaks. It's like AAA. In the mitochondria, we're missing that. We don't hardly have any AAAs in our mitochondria. So if the DNA gets affected, chemicals or whatever, oxidative stress, free radicals, AAA is not there to fix it. And so it's more prone to damage compared to our other DNA. So while mitochondria do great things, man, they wrap those things in bubble wrap, because they get bumped and all of a sudden they're like, I'm going to break that part off. It's broken. I can't use it. Now you're left with like 3/4 of a, in mitochondria. So protect them.
Yeah. And it's really cool. I'm going to circle back to that reactive oxygen species part of it with mitochondria. They have a really kind of different thing they do with ROSs, which is pretty unique, and I definitely talk about that as we get into mitochondrial dysfunction. Segue for those out there listening at home. And so now we know we have these mitochondria, they do all these amazing things for us, and they're very fragile. When we talk about mitochondrial dysfunction, what does that mean when you hear that term?
So I read a study, this research article, and they said pretty much any dysfunction in the whole body, and they had this humongous list, everything from basic old fatigue and headaches, all the way up. They included autism, they had Down syndrome, viruses, chronic disease, autoimmune, et cetera, mitochondria play a role. It doesn't mean they're the starting factor. It doesn't mean that they were the trigger and the reason, but they play a role. And I thought that was so fascinating, I have actually read it in a couple of papers now. So which makes it difficult, because people listening right now are like, well, I got headaches. Does that mean I have mitochondrial dysfunction? Like, I'm tired. Does that mean I get skin rashes? Would that count? I have Hashimoto's. Do you think that's me too? The answer is yes. The mitochondria play a role in everything. This cycle that they do, called the Krebs cycle, is ridiculously important. And if dysfunctional, among other things, can lead to, contribute to, or worsen any condition, any of them. And so when you read about these in the papers, and they just sort of go through all the systems, nervous system, cardiovascular system, right, reproductive system, et cetera, musculoskeletal system. And then you remember what the mitochondria do. You're like, oh yeah, of course. Now, is it the leading cause? It probably not, no, but by optimizing your mitochondria, will it help? Likely, yes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's kind of like my internal thing is like, there's probably 97% of my patients here I'm treating for mitochondrial dysfunction. They may not know it. I mean, I say it overtly because there's only so much time we got here, right? But at the end of the day, like, I want to make sure that we are doing something to help with their mitochondrial function, right? And sometimes that's not a supplement. Sometimes that's not a prescription. It might just be like, hey, you should sleep more. What can we do to help your sleep? Maybe we might want to try some intermittent fasting. Hey, how about eating a little bit less? And we'll talk about some of these things and how that incorporates with mitochondrial function and improving it as well. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Okay, so now we've kind of hit that foundation of what mitochondrial dysfunction is. What are some of the things that cause it?
Yes.
That's right. All the things.
Yes, all the things. So let's talk about big things. The foods. So rancid oils, unhealthy foods, chemicals, toxicants, fertilizers, et cetera, stress, increasing stress, not having enough antioxidants, not eating enough, colorful type foods, medications. There are a slew of medications out there that have been known, they're studied, they rightfully just put right on their white paper that they know that they damage mitochondria. You can be born with mitochondrial inborn errors. And then those are called primary. And then secondary is mostly lifestyle, environmental, medication, et cetera. And so those are the big things that we think of with what affects your mitochondria.
Yeah. So some really cool things about mitochondria, because this is like where I get all excited. And I was reading some articles and doing my little, driving home from work, watching videos and all that. And two of the things that are interesting on mitochondria is how they both produce reactive oxygen species and are damaged by it. And so two things that struck with me, the first was overeating.
Yes.
Right. And which was like, oh, why is that affecting? Right. Because if you are, let's say if you're eating excess calories, now your body is creating, basically you're creating more ATP, but also now you're creating more ROS. And this is why sometimes, eating too much is an issue. The second thing, which I thought was really fascinating, I definitely want to hear, because I read, I was like, I had the light bulb moment when I was driving. It talked about the cell danger response, and which is all these things that Dr. Jones mentioned create that cell danger response. Your body saying there's something wrong. We need to protect ourselves, and we're going to do different things to protect, whether that be oxidative species, inflammation, stopping cellular metabolism, all these things to protect itself, right? And it mentioned that under the cell danger response, the body will actually produce more mitochondria. You'll get, mitochondrial biogenesis, right? And I was like, oh, now you have more mitochondria, you'll have more reactive oxidative species. But it's kind of offset because now these more mitochondria are producing more energy, so not necessarily a bad thing. So it's kind of fascinating how these organelles, how powerful they are, but they almost have like this little fail safe that's like, hey, I don't want too much of me. So
yeah. And we call it, because not all stress is bad, right? So even things like being out in the sun, the sunshine, exercise can damage mitochondria. Does that mean you shouldn't exercise? No, it's a good stress. Now you can make it a bad stress. You can over exercise just like you can overeat, and then you're causing problems, but it's pushing the limits of your mitochondria so they can become more resilient, expand, and handle it better. It's called a eustress. And so while we think of worst case scenario, chemicals, toxicants, maybe medications, diets, et cetera, It's the normal everyday stuff, breathing, digesting your food. Maybe you didn't overeat at all. You had a typically normal amount of food. The act of digestion requires mitochondrial activation. Any mitochondrial activation, doesn't matter what it is, you will generate these free radicals in the body, which they can be damaging. But if you have your antioxidant system to take care of them, like your fire, department putting out fires, then you're okay. It's when it's an imbalance that's the problem. You're missing the fire department. We don't have a big enough fire department, and now you're raging with fire, and that's where you get the symptoms.
And that's the biggest thing now, symptoms. Yes. That's where I want to close it out a little bit here. So obviously we talked about decrease in energy, right? You got me there.
Which is probably I would say it's probably the biggest one, both in physical energy and brain energy. So I always clarify with patients when they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I'm like, you're so tired, but can you read a book? Can you sit down and relax and read a book? Oh yeah, that's not the problem. But could you go on a walk? No. I'm way too tired. I do chores, I do my job, I chase after my kids, and I'm exhausted at the end of the day, but I can read a book. The opposite is I can't focus. I can't read a book. I can't watch a movie. I can't track. It's exhausting. Any brain work, I do my job and I'm just mentally exhausted at the end of the day. So being able to clarify that is, one, can be very helpful. But two, the mitochondria are involved in both. Are you physically exhausted or are you mentally exhausted? Or both? A lot of people, unfortunately, in our world are both. So energy, big huge.
Time. And energy is as a practitioner, it is the most elusive of our things, because at the end of the day, so many patients come to us like, I want more energy. Oh, great. Okay.
What could it be?
Because energy is, you hit it, it's physical. And in many ways, it's psychological, or if you want to call it psychophysical or psychochemical, whatever it is, because there's two aspects of that, because you can have that physical energy, but if you're just like you say, you're tired, you're exhausted, you can't focus. Sometimes that's worse. Sometimes worse because you won't go work out if you're physically tired. I'm sorry, if you're mentally tired.
Right.
You just won't. And so now that leads to a whole cascade of things, right? And so, and I always say, because again, we deal with a lot of people looking to optimize their health and function. It's like, if you're working out and eating healthy, and we've already addressed your hormones, and you are not, improving your strength, you actually feel like you're getting weaker. If your endurance is going down, it may be indicative that we need to focus on your mitochondria a little bit more. And this is kind of,
people report that, right? The endurance going down. They'll say, when I go work out, I'm exhausted at the end. I don't have that high. I don't feel better. I don't feel like that workout, even a light workout, it doesn't have to be a hard one. I used to be able to lift weights really well. Now I can't. It's too tired for me. You could be struggling in the skeletal muscle with your mitochondria, among other things. But that's another one that I will hear from people, is about the most I can do is walk. I used to lift weights, but it's just too hard right now. I'm too exhausted. Mitochondria is the first thing I think of.
It always is everything. It all leads
everything.
back. It all leads back. It's the gut and the mitochondria. All roads lead to the gut. And
I
the
agree.
And it's like, you can get that going, and you can do amazing work with people and with ourselves too. And so I am super excited for part two. I'm going to circle back to some of those conditions that mitochondrial dysfunction is implicated in, right? Because it's like all the things, right? Because again, like you said, it's like, hey, is it the primary thing? No. Can it help? And this is why doing some of the supplements and treatments that we're going to mention in part two can be beneficial for anyone trying to optimize their health. So that's going to be exciting, and I can't wait to do that and talk to you about that. But before we go, if people want more information on you and what you do and your journey, where can they find that?
I am active on social media, specifically on Instagram. I'm at dr.carriejones. I am getting more active on TikTok. For those who are into TikTok, I'm braving that.
Oh my gosh.
And my website is drcarriejones.com.
Yep. I refuse. I refuse to
the TikTok.
The TikTok. I won't be TikTok. I refuse. That is the last. If that is it, I will like we're gonna have the whole
kicking and screaming.
Oh no, it's like, because I'll get hooked. Now I'm doing like videos.
You will get hooked. Yes, I'll be honest. I have learned a lot on TikTok about just things in life I didn't know for some reason. It's the book of the life of TikTok. But a number of our colleagues are over there spreading education. So. Yeah.
And this is the moment where I realized that TikTok will not be sponsoring this podcast, and that's okay. And at that moment, Dr. Jones realized he has lost a potential sponsor, and that's okay. Well, hey, thanks for the time for part one. Excited for part 2. There'll be more information in the show notes. And great talking to you. And for everyone listening and watching, we will see you very soon.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is stop recording.